Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another of my Terminal Directive Cards episodes. For those of you still unacquainted with this series, where have you been? Under a rock or something? So, I'm featuring a Terminal Directive card every episode, and this is like a pack review, but way better because we don't only just discuss the theoretical aspects of a card, we also put it in practice by including it in a deck and then doing post-game analysis. So, today's cards, not just two cards, today's triple whammy of cards is Deep Data Mining, Dhegdheer, and Savant. We have a lot of cards to cover in a single deck. Yeah, it's crazy, I know, but the way Terminal Directive was built, obviously, it was the cards in there are meant to synergize with one another, so it was quite inevitable that this would happen. Still, let's go through the cards one by one. We'll start with Deep Data Mining. This is very powerful multi-access, very comparable to Maker's Eye, which is 1 cheaper, 2 less influence, but only allows you to access a maximum of 2 additional cards as opposed to 4 additional cards with Deep Data Mining. There's a catch though. Deep Data Mining only works if you have lots of unused memory. And this is a paradox because to make a successful run, you need to have programs installed, icebreakers to break ice, which means you won't have memory remaining. So to solve this paradox, you need some way to have icebreakers that don't consume memory. One such way is cloud breakers. If you have 2 or more link, cloud breakers like the Geist Breaker suite and the Sunny Breaker suite don't cost MU. Today we'll be looking at the other solution, the solution that came with Terminal Directive, which is Dhegdheer and the Sage Breakers. I'm not really sure what to call these, Greek Breakers, you tell me, the Genius Breakers, whatever it is. Savant, Sage, Adept. Ironically, all of them take up 2 memory, so they are very, very expensive. However, due to their limitation of, or rather their synergy with unused memory, they will be played in a deck that mitigates their memory usage, and there exists no better card at doing that than Dhegdheer. Dhegdheer mitigates the memory cost of the program hosted on it entirely. So these breakers will cost 0 memory, and not only that, it also reduces the install cost by 1, so it's pretty handy. Honestly, I think Dhegdheer might just be best in a deck that abuses the -1 install cost. So you want to be able to recurrently install some programs, something like a Cache or more commonly Chameleon. So Dhegdheer in that case would act exactly like a Scheherazade, except not vulnerable to best defense and being infection. But we're not doing that today. We are just doing the intended use in Terminal Directive, which is pure synergy with the Sage Breakers. However, these breakers are pretty crappy. Yeah? If you think about it, in the history of the game, typically all the 2 credits to break 1 subroutine breakers are terrible. You think of Darwin, Knight. Just thinking of these make me cringe. Like, these are not good breakers by today's standards, so we can't actually use them. There's one exception though. Savant is 2 credits to break 2 code gate subroutines. This is the only Sage Breaker and subtype that goes for a 2-to-2 ratio. So it suddenly becomes a lot better. You're breaking DNA trackers for 4 credits instead of 6, which is a big deal. Yeah, it's you don't want to be paying that much for code gates when they're so common. So that aside, we are not going to play Sage and Adept because they don't have that benefit. We're just going to stay with Savant. The other big benefit of Savant is that when you host it on a Dhegdheer and you have 5 free memory, which is typical if you have a 1 memory console, Savant will pump up from 1 strength to 6. This allows coverage for all sentries and code gates that are 6 strength or less, and this is the magic number. I think I talked about this threshold in the previous video. You want your breakers to be at strength 6, to deal with strength 6 ice, because that's where modern ice are at. You have Archangel, DNA Tracker. These are nasties that lie at the strength 6 threshold, and Savant on a Dhegdheer deals with that. Not only that, with sentries, it also deals with Archer, the most scary sentry out there. So we have that covered. And yeah, 2 credits to break 1 sentry subroutine is not a good ratio, and it's the weakness of this deck, but it's fine because Shapers don't really have a good solution to good killer solution anyway. They are either forced to import stuff like Mimic or Switchblade, or play stealth breakers like Dagger. So for most other regular Shapers, sentries are always a pain, and Savant's already one of the better solutions, not requiring a pumping in strength, not requiring paying to pump strength. So yeah, Savant is pretty good in that regard. So now that we've discussed Savant and Dhegdheer, let's move on to the rest of our rig. What does our ideal endgame rig look like? So obviously we're playing 3 Dhegdheers because we want to see them consistently early so that we can host Savant on it. What else can we host Savant on? What else can we host on Dhegdheer? Well, we need to host our Fractor, right? This breaks sentries, this breaks code gates. What about barriers? Well, let's import something from Anarch, shall we? What's the best Anarch sentry Fractor? Nah, never mind. What's the best Fractor in the game? Paperclip. Let's play that. So that's our breaker suite covered, but we still have one more Dhegdheer. Can we host something on it? Sure, why not? We have some of the best big memory programs in the game, in the Shaper faction. Magnum Opus, one card, one stop economy suite, and Hyperdriver. I want to play this card so bad outside of a stupid diaper shell, and this is exactly the kind of deck where Hyperdriver fits in to accelerate your gameplay. During your setup phase, you can drop a Hyperdriver down while there's still empty Dhegdheers around, and then pop it to get 7 clicks in a turn. That's 14 credits off Magnum Opus. That is so much early game burst economy. It is ridiculous. So I love this setup right here. That last Dhegdheer can be used for Hyperdrivers in the early game, Magnum Opus after the early game to the late game. And yeah, this is your ideal late game setup every single game. That's a lot of setup, right? If you look at it, you not only need like a 5-cost Opus, a 4-cost Paperclip, a 4-cost Savant, you'll need all 3 Dhegdheers on the table. Is that a tall ask? It probably is. So this is why we want a click efficient deck. We have so many things we need to set up. We need to make sure our clicks are efficient. Our breaker suite is actually rather click efficient to install because all you need is 1 click to install the Savant. Paperclip installs from the bin, so that's a free click. Your deep data mining allows you to make very few but very targeted powerful runs, so you're saving on clicks in terms of running. You don't need to run that often. You get passive draw and econ because you're playing Scrubbers and Beth, some very good passive economy cards. And finally, you get lots of clicks. Yeah, I mean, all this click compression or rather lack of click usage means that you can spend most of your clicks drawing cards and hitting Opus, which is exactly what an Opus deck wants to do. So, to further compress clicks, what identity should we choose? I mean, Ayla seems very natural, as we mentioned in the Ayla and Velasco video. If you have cards that rely on ordering, such as Dhegdheer, you do want to play Ayla. But in this case, I think we want click efficiency over guarantee ordering. And this brings us to one of the most efficient Shaper IDs around, Haley. Haley is an amazing ID to play with our suite. To keep in mind that we're also playing self-modifying codes, so we will be able to get the programs in the right order. And Haley allows you to do some really fun tricks between SMCing for Dhegdheer and installing something from your grip at the same time. And we'll get to see some of that during this game. So, with that, enough talking from me, let's head into the game. Today we're up against Gagarin, and the first thing we immediately notice is that there are 54 cards in the deck. This means they only have one objective in life.
Spam or die!
So, what do? We know we have Scrubbers, 2 of them in the deck, so we can actually contest their assets, and I will be attempting to do that. But first, let's look at our opening hand. Even though there are no Scrubbers, there are some really amazing cards in there. We have the Hyperdriver Opus combo for 14 credits in a turn, but we also have Temujin, which I'm looking to unload in turn 1. This will give me the money I need to contest their assets while setting up my Magnum Opus rig. However, there's another really key card in my hand then you might overlook at first sight. It's deep data mining. Again, someone who's not running a lot of ice. They ice HQ first turn. Big mistake. Now I'm really tempted to do that deep data mining, but doing so means that I actually go below the credit threshold needed to install Magnum Opus or Temujin. But I don't care. I want agendas, and I get it. I get a government contracts. Thankfully, that wasn't government takeover. Did a double take there. So right off the bat, we get to observe the occasionally huge benefit that deep data mining confers when we play it. If the Corp doesn't ice up R&D on turn 1 and you start with a deep data mining in opening hand, well, you get the best of both worlds. No programs installed and an easy run into R&D to access 5 cards. They're very straightforward. Now here comes a play that I was not ready for. My opponent uses Consulting Visit to play hard-hitting news. I'm very low on credits after playing the deep mining, so of course I get hit with tags. Now, that was bad, but with 7 clicks, I have a lot of things I can do. And the one thing I wanted to do was to drop my Temujin and liberate the entirety of it. So yes, this is going to be a very, very sweet turn because with 7 clicks, you can actually take all the money off Temujin, which is amazing. And I had exactly enough time to run on my last Temujin run and trash the Bankers group on that run, which was very important because that Bankers group, if left untrashed, would have given my opponent the 3 credits they needed to then boom me. I remember I still have the tags, so now I have to clear the tags because my opponent's on 4 credits. So I very narrowly escaped the hard-hitting news threat right there. Thankfully, my opponent's not MBN, so they had no way to close my accounts. I didn't have to worry about that. Speaking of which, yeah, sure, they can splash 1 influence for closed accounts, but I was banking on them not having it. Very simple, because that one turn where they res the Mumbat City Hall and play the hard-hitting news, it basically confirmed for me their entire deck. For those of you not familiar with Hot Tubs, this is Hot Tubs. The goal of this deck is to land a hard-hitting news while they're rich, and they will get rich because they have all the Wayland assets. Then slap 4 tags, and while you're trying to clear them, they res a Zealous Judge so that they can put more tags on you because you don't have enough clicks to clear all the tags and trash the Zealous Judge, and you will dive in a fiery inferno. So my job is to avoid the hard-hitting news, and the best way to do that is obviously to stay richer than my opponent, which is why it's a very good thing that I actually found my first Dhegdheer this early. At one point, I had no cards in my hand, if you saw it early on. And that was amazing because every single card I drew was that useful. Dhegdheer allows me to host Magnum Opus, which means I get a lot of money. Now, speaking of money, my opponent just got a lot of money with Hostile Takeover. What is this? You don't want to play Hostile Takeover in a deck that relies on assets being taxing to trash. That bad pup just turned off his ID ability. Well, I'll take the free employee strike. Thanks very much. In the meantime, I'll do a really cute trick during my turn. With the SMC installed, on the Corp's turn, I will sack it for a Dhegdheer, allowing a Haley trigger to install a Hyperdriver from my hand. Suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, I'm gonna get 7 clicks on my next turn, and the Corp has very little they can do to prepare for it. We saw how absolutely phenomenal the first Hyperdriver was. It allowed me to empty an entire Temujin and escape the hard-hitting news threat completely. This time, I don't have a hard-hitting news, but you bet I can make this 7 clicks do a lot of work. Most notably, I'll hit Opus a lot of times, which allows me to keep up with my opponent's credit level. Now, one thing I've yet to mention is the early Astrolabe install. Finding that early was also very clutch. It feels like I drew almost perfectly in the early game, and this is allowing me to actually somewhat cope with this game. That Astrolabe has been drawing me a lot of cards, and in this case, it drew me the scrubber I need to contest my opponent's assets. You notice that I immediately went for the turtle backs. That was going to generate a lot of money for my opponent if left uncontested, so I had to go for it. You'll notice how I prioritize assets here. I'm taking down all the big economy cards first, namely Commercial Bankers Group and Turtle Backs. Those are 2 very big threats that I'm looking to eliminate from the table. I'm not that worried about Museum of History. My opponent can reshuffle as many cards back into the deck as they want. They are not winning with that. Encryption Protocol is actually a rather big priority that I need to trash at some point, but for now, that is not viable. Trash, I need to deal with all the big money cards first. That is my first priority. Second priority is protocols. And yeah, I'll just take it from there after that. So, meanwhile, but at the same time, I'm not neglecting my board state. I'm usually going to spend 1 click to do a Haley trigger. In this case, I'm installing Earthrise and ShadowNet. I'll spend 1 click using my scrubber credits to trash something, and the rest of my clicks can go to hitting Opus. This is how I keep up with my opponent's passive economy. So you notice this turn, hit Opus for 2, and then run, seeing a commercial bankers group to trash immediately. And to continue keeping up, I'm gonna drop my 3rd hyperdriver, which will give me 7 click turns. A 7 click turn next turn. Actually, scratch that. 8 click turn, because I dropped Beth as well. So I'm gonna get 8 clicks next turn. Deal with it. Alright, you can't wait for an 8 click turn. Well, I'm not gonna dive anyone, there's no keyhole in my deck. But this should allow me to search pretty far ahead of my opponent. I would love to draw my 2nd scrubber right now, but it's nowhere in sight. So I have to deal with what I have right now. With an 8 click turn, however, I can hit Opus just enough so that I can actually trash multiple assets. My opponent played Friends to install 2 commercial bankers group, which is a nice move, but I'm just going to use this 8 click turn to get ahead of my opponent. Instead of their friends overwhelming me, I'm going to overwhelm them with this 8 click turn by trashing first the encryption protocol, which reduces the trash cost of by 1 for all the other assets for the rest of this turn. Then I'm going to deal with the bankers group. So trashing the protocol at first saves me 2 clicks. Sorry, 2 credits down the line. And I still have enough clicks to... did I hit Opus? Yeah, I still have a remaining click to Opus. So I basically completely nullified my opponent's advantage with Friends with my 8 click turn from Hyperdriver. Very sweet. So at this point, I can just keep up with my opponent by trashing 1 asset every turn. Remember, Gagarin's ability is blank, so I'm basically making this runs for essentially free. I see an Indian Union Stock Exchange here, and that is actually a rather key economy card. Not as big as Turtlebacks or Commercial Bankers Group in my mind, because I'm taking very good care not to res any ice for my opponent. If my opponent cannot res their neutral ice, they cannot trigger IUSE as often as they like, Indian Union Stock Exchange. So I'm not that worried about the other 2 IUSEs being online for now. I just trashed the first one, the last one that I saw, because I didn't want to rerun that server anyway. So I trashed an IUSE, I went to trash Museum of History, and now my opponent's going to start getting flooded out, because the R&D agenda density is going to only increase if they don't have any Museum of Histories on the board. Then I continue. Now I actually have the tempo to keep up with the unres assets. Notice that I'm not prioritizing the IUSEs here. Again, they're not getting much mileage out of it. What I need to do is to make sure that my opponent does not have any nasty assets on the table. The Zealous Judge is exactly what I'm thinking of right now. I'm still slightly below my opponent's credit level, so in theory they could hard hit news me and then res the Zealous Judge, so I need to be wary of that. I clear Turtlebacks here, using my one scrubber, and then I hit Opus a bunch of times, and then start discarding cards here. Now, there's a Deja Vu in my hand. I almost ditched it, but then realized that this could come in very, very handy for recurring Plascrete, so I end up keeping the Deja Vu, instead electing to drop my draw cards because my opponent's drawing me all the cards I need, right? So I'm actually running out of deck, which is actually quite dangerous, because if I run out of deck, I'll have fewer cards to defend myself with Plascrete. So, we continue the asset race. I know this is boring, it's a war of attrition, but trust me, I'm winning this one. That one bad publicity is actually doing so much work for me. My opponent doesn't even realize it. So I'm forcing a Jackson out, and you know things are good when Jacksons are being forced out. A commercial bankers group hits the bin even before it sees the light of day, which is always good. And with my credit advantage, I decide to go for... Whoa! Spicy. Sandberg. Big mistake from my opponent not to protect the Sandberg. Always protect a Sandberg. Yeah. If you know that I'm on the Savant Sagebreaker suite, you really should protect your Sandberg, because my opponent could have potentially completely locked me out by putting a Quandaries or something over the Sandberg. Thank goodness my opponent did not see that line, so I get to continue on. And oh, Zealous Judge. So yeah, this is why you check every face down remote. Face up remotes are not that threatening. You know what's there. The face downs are the more threatening ones, because they could be Zealous Judges waiting for you. waiting to spring a hard-hitting news trap. They could be sandbugs waiting to just claw you to death. So I'm gonna trash the bunch of stuff. Tech startup in the bin. Museum of History can stay for one turn. It's not a critical asset like Sensi, which needs to be killed immediately, or in this matchup, Commercial Bankers Group, that needs to be killed immediately. Yeah, Museum can stay on the board. It's on like tier 2 of my priority list. Bankers was tier 1, that had to go first. So my opponent, now seeing that their asset spam was futile, that they had no way to win on spam, they instead go vertically, like any normal Corp would, and try to score in that remote. I'm not going to really care. All their agendas have to be double advanced before scoring. They're all 5-3s, right? So I can just sit back, relax until my opponent shows signs of advancement. In the meantime, I'm going to make use of my scrubber credits to trash 1 IUSE, because I have a feeling that I might need to contest this remote soon, and I do not want them to get IUSE money. Friends comes. What will my opponent play friends on? Encryption Protocol and Encryption Protocol. Okay, so I need to contest the remote. Most people would run the remote first click here, and because we are always conditioned to run first click, but instead, I'm going to trash the encryption protocols first. Why would you trash encryption protocols before running the remote? It's not like there's a Caprice or an Ash in that remote. Why are you wasting time doing that? You'll soon find out. But first, I suddenly realized I actually have a second scrubber in my hand, so I finally drawn it. I'm going to install it with the SATCON on the Haley trigger, and then trash the second IUSE. There. Now with my final click, I'm going to run the remote, and now you'll see the beauty of how I played out my turn. First a quandary, which I break with 2 credits, and then the tour guide. Tour guide is 2 credits per subroutine. It is the worst piece of ice imaginable, but this is why I run 2 scrubbers. Against Gagarin, I knew that my lose condition is to let my opponent spam assets and make tour guide impossible to break. I knew I had no good solution for tour guide, so the only way I was going to get past tour guides on whichever server was to keep their assets down. This is why I chose to trash 3 assets on the same turn I went for the government contracts. Of course, I suffered hard-hitting news as a result. Because I spent so many credits trashing those assets, I was bound to get hit by hard-hitting news. But that's fine. Don't forget, I still have 5 clicks. My opponent's still too rich. So I can easily clear these 4 tags and still have 1 spare click to make a frivolous run on this NASX. Now I'm really suppressing the assets. My opponent only has 1 res asset on the board. Those tour guides suddenly look a lot less menacing right now. My opponent jammed something to the remote. Again, I'm not concerned at all. At this point, my opponent spends so many credits on the hard-hitting news that even Sandberg in the remote isn't that big of a threat right now. I can just sit back, money up with Opus, and wait and think of how I want to execute my final blow. My final blow will be on the central. It's either HQ or R&D. I have mechanisms for both. The obvious choice is deep data mining, and I think a lot of players would just drop the deep data mining and just outright win here. That's not a problem, but I wanted to play this completely safe. Since I'm playing against a prison deck, I want to imprison the prison player, and of course, to do that, we want to go for the 100% line of play here, and that's HQ. I taunt my opponent by career fairing a HQ Temujin here, telling my opponent, you know what, I bet you have agendas in there, and I'm going to tell you that I'm going to attack it next turn. Good luck defending it. And so my opponent plays Friends to recur Encryption Protocol and Encryption Protocol. Well, that's nasty. Well, not much I can do about that. I can't trash them all in one turn, but I'll take my time. I'll trash 1 this turn, I'll trash 2 the next turn. Because the one that I trash this turn is going to be very expensive, right? With all 3 on the board, this costs 5 to trash, that's all my scrubber credits. Well, now I'll go for HQ, as promised. Seeing that it's just a quandary, I'm paying 2 credits by get 4 with Temujin. I'm just going to empty my Temujin here. I see a consulting visit. Who cares? I run again. Have the agendas piled up. It's a boom. Nope, no boom for you. One more time. Let's hit HQ. What else do we see? We see a Hades fragment for the game. And folks, that's how you play against asset spam. Now I must say that was an easier than usual spam battle for Shapers because of the various things that went my way. I had a good opening draw. Literally, the only thing I could have asked more for in my opening draw were the 2 scrubbers. The first scrubber came in the early to mid game. I would like to see it on turn 1. The hostile takeover back perp was also working very heavily in my favor. But anyway, in whatever the draws or luck or situation is, there is a good technique to playing against spam. And for those of you who are not that familiar with it, it's to ask yourself, instead of asking yourself what is my win condition, ask yourself what is your lose condition. Because if you're looking to drag out the long game, your objective is not to win immediately, but to not lose. And how do you not lose? Well, let's identify the lose conditions. In a Hot Tubs deck, we basically know of the hard-hitting news, Zealous Judge, and Boom combo. But there are other things we have to worry about. LC stands for lose condition. LC2 is the Sandberg lockout that we discovered midway through the game. And LC3 is something that is always on my mind. I ask myself, what ice does this Wayland deck run? And Tour Guide is definitely one of Gagarin's best ice. So that was a factor to keep in mind. And because of the Tour Guide, I look at my Breaker Suite. Using Savant, I was like, there is absolutely no way I can win against Tour Guide if I let the assets go out of control. Hence, I need to play the asset control game. And to do that, I need to set a priority list for assets. You can't just willy-nilly trash assets at your liking. There is a certain order, and that really depends on your deck, that depends on your opponent's deck, that depends on the game state. But listed on the screen right here are the priority lists that I have taken and the reasoning behind that. So as you can see, it is logically sound, and this is how you deal with asset spam. You need to know your priorities and to take your time to dismantle those assets, because eventually, as you saw, I was able to overcome my opponent with superior economy and click efficiency. Speaking of that, let's look at some game statistics. These stats will blow your mind. Try to make a guess. Try to estimate how many Haley triggers, Astrolabe draws, Opus hits, Scrubber credits I gained, number of clicks gained from Beth, and the amount of work that Batpup did for me. Pause the video, give it a guess. I'm giving you a hint that the game lasted 22 turns. So based on that, how much do you think I gained? The answer will be revealed in 3, 2, 1. These numbers are shocking. Astrolabe literally drew half my deck. Opus gave me 72 credits. Half of that credits is the amount that Scrubbers gained me. Scrubber looks like such an innocent card, but 2 recurring credits over a long time gives you a lot of money. Bev gave me 12 clicks. That's 3 whole turns of advantage I had over my opponent with just this one Bev. And that hostile takeover, oh boy, that hostile takeover really cost my opponent big time. Sure, they gained 7 credits, but instead they conceded 22 to me. This is the extent of passive economy and passive draw. This is the extent of benefit that you get when you have these cards in your deck. And the game is slowly moving towards such cards. You want these passive cards that make you, power your draw and money engine passively, rather than spending active clicks, taking money. Because really, click for a credit and click for a draw are, no, just don't cut it for today's game. So on that note, when you're looking at your deck and saying, can I go head on versus asset spam? I think a lot of people would just say, oh, I can because I have Scrubbers as hate cards, or oh, I cannot because I don't have hate cards. But it's really not as clear and dry as that. There is a lot more nuance to it than you might think. Most specifically, if you're not building your deck such that it can be played efficiently, there's no point having hate cards. Conversely, if your deck isn't as tagged out as, say, a Reg Wiz deck with Temujin, you have fewer recurring credits than Wizard, you don't have Hacktivist Meeting, you don't have all the hate cards. But if your deck is constructed in an efficient way like my Haley deck is, clearly I can still go toe-to-toe versus asset spam. So let's just do a quick analysis of the Corp versus Render Tempo. In a typical Corp turn, this game, my opponent would spend 1 or 2 clicks would spend 2 clicks doing basic actions like drawing and taking a credit. This is very inefficient. And then they maybe spam 1 asset, maybe 2 assets per turn. Ultimately, their gain is rather minimal. Most of their gain is coming from the passive assets, the Indian Union Stock Exchange that I left up, the NASAX that acts like a pack campaign. That's not a lot of gain. Whereas on my side, I have, not only do I have more clicks than my opponent due to Beth. I also use them more efficiently. Instead of clicking for a credit, I'm clicking for 2 with Opus. Instead of installing, one asset per turn, which is not a lot of game advancement because I end up trashing it anyway, I get to install 2 cards per turn, up to 2 cards because of Haley's ability. Because of this, at every turn of the corner, I am faster than my opponent. I am getting money faster than my opponent. I'm getting more passive draw and economy than my opponent because of Astrolabe and Scrubber, and my installs are more efficient than my opponent. All these things add up to give me a lot more gain per turn than my opponent. While my opponent's making maybe around 4 credits per turn, I'm easily making 6 credits per turn. Of course, this is before accounting for trash costs, so this is why I'm able to keep up with my opponent. This extra edge that I have in credits is spent on trashing my opponent's assets. Not only that, I still have the clicks remaining to actually advance my gameplay. While I was slowly dismantling my opponent's board state, I was at the same time setting up my Dhegdheers, my SMCs, and eventually my breakers. Unlike most other corps, I was not gear checked early on, so I actually could afford the luxury of time. It took me, I think 15 turns to set up my whole breaker suite, but I was in no hurry. So here, this just shows you how important click efficiency is. You want to either compress your clicks, like Haley's ability does, allowing you to install 2 cards per click, or you want to make sure that every click gains you a lot more than a click does for your opponent, and that is how you beat asset spam. Simply have a more efficient deck than your opponent. So let's now go back to card analysis. Looking at Dhegdheer, this is a rather clunky card in the sense that it needs to be ordered correctly, but also requires an extra click to install, right? So you can't really, it basically, why would you spend extra clicks most people nowadays don't run things like Akamatsu memchip, Dyson memchip. These are considered inefficient because if you're spending clicks on extra memory, you are losing in a sense. That is a lot of setup overhead. One must take note that even though it's only 2 to install, the real cost is the click, and that is very expensive, which is why I'm playing Haley. Of course, this is mitigated by the fact that the Breaker Suite, Savant, and Paperclip are relatively clickless to install. For 1 click, I install the Savant. As mentioned earlier, Paperclip is free to install, free of clicks because I can put it in a bin. The big bonus of Dhegdheer, however, comes with Hyperdriver because as mentioned earlier, in the setup phase, Dhegdheer can be used to host Hyperdriver, and this is something that most Shaper decks cannot have. I always try to put Hyperdriver in my Shaper decks whenever possible. No, I'm not Rotich, but I still do try to do that, not because I am a degenerate bastard, but because I really sincerely think that Hyperdriver is one of the best Shaper cards in the game. The fact that it gives you so many early clicks allows you to show up the fact that Shapers typically require a lot of setup overhead, and Hyperdriver just mitigates that. The fact that Hyperdriver can be installed without worrying about memory limits is amazing. And the -1 install cost is just cherry on the cake. The problem with most other Shaper decks is that even though you run things like, a typical Magnum Opus Shaper deck, for example, you can't have Opus and Hyperdriver out at the same time unless you have an Astrolabe. And even if you do have an Astrolabe, that means you have no memory left for the rest of your breakers, which is unacceptable. But this is not the case here because Dhegdheer. So this is what makes Dhegdheer really good. It has the dual function of enabling a very strong setup card in Hyperdriver and enables a very efficient breaker suite in Savant with Paperclip. Now let's talk about deep data mining. We clearly didn't see too much use of it. I used 1 on the very first click, or very first turn rather, and it never saw use again. So why is that? This goes back to the matchup. As an asset control runner, I am not looking to make central runs at all. You saw that I never ran a single central until the end of the game. That's pertinent to point 2 right here. Why did I run HQ at the end? Because I knew that I was in a winning position and I decided to put my opponent out of their misery. In theory, I could have just continued keeping the assets down and mashing Opus until I'm twice as rich as the Corp. I just chose to end the game there because I knew I could. So because of that, there was absolutely no need to run R&D this entire game apart from the early game. But for that early game opportunity, it was just handed to me on a silver platter. I was given an opportunity to use it where the cost to me is low, in the sense that I didn't need to set up breakers, I didn't need clicks to install breakers, and I didn't need to deal with face check ice, but I could potentially get a lot of value out of it, namely the 5 deep access. So this is what deep data mining offers you. In addition, in the late game, deep data mining offers me a lot of peace of mind, because after I had the 1 government contracts in my score area, if things went bad for me towards the mid-late game, maybe my opponent went on top of me, maybe I couldn't find my scrubbers, and my opponent just pulled ahead of me, maybe if they repeatedly hard-hitting used me and I was not able to clear tags, well, at least I have a pseudo out with deep data mining. I could set myself up for what you typically don't want to do, which is to Hail Mary against asset spam. If you're trying to Hail Mary against asset spam, you're probably losing, because you are grasping on straws that are very thin, and you leave your fate in the hands of the RNG gods. Whereas, I went for the assured win by methodically contesting my opponent's assets. This was a 100% line for me, given my good draw. And towards the end there, I could have chose to do deep data mining instead of legwork, or instead of single accesses on HQ, but I was playing for a 100% win, and to do that, I needed to keep a float of credits relative to my opponent. And the best way to do that, obviously, was to point Temujin on HQ and get lots of single accesses from there, which is why I went for HQ instead of R&D. But you notice that I did have the deep data mining in hand the entire game. Had I needed to, this was always a possible mechanism for me to just pull out a Hail Mary win. And it's still a very powerful card as a backup in case my main 100% line of play fails. So yeah, still a card that I very much appreciate, even though I did not really play it after turn number 1. It's very useful backup. Well, hopefully this was a very educational video on how to play against asset spam. You don't have to be Anarch to contest assets. Clearly, I mean, sure, I did end up leaning very heavily on Scrubbers, and well, Scrubbers just a very good card, right? It's a Sundew. it's a Sundew for assets. How good is that, right? But ultimately, it's still you still need to target the assets down correctly. As I said, it's not just about running mindlessly and trashing the wrong assets. You need to be proactive and very targeted with and disciplined, should I say. The most important thing, be very disciplined with your game plan. Have a clear game plan in mind and stick to it. Well, hopefully that was good. In the meantime, thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you next time. Happy night running. Goodbye.